their Ask NPSMA presentation. Today's talk is part of the best practices for the PSM in the time of coronavirus and beyond series. Today we'll be hearing from two PSM program directors surrounding the topic of addressing the needs of virtual and remote culminating experiences required for all PSM programs. And in just a moment, my committee member, Aaron Guy, will be introducing our presenters. But real quick, looking ahead, I also want to go ahead and give you info about the next presentation in our series, which will be held on Thursday, September the 17th at same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And it's preparing students for a remote working world. So I hope to see you all there at our next presentation as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of the layout we have in mind for today is we have two presenters. We'll have a segment of some questions that we've already prepared to ask them, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Okay, Aaron, hand it off to you.
Thank you, Amber. We have two presentations and followed by some questions today. First, we will have Teresa Macklin, who is the Program Director for Cal State San Marcos PSM in Cybersecurity, followed by Jennie Willis, who is the Program Director for Colorado State University PSM in Zoo, Aquarium, and Animal Shelter Management, which sounds incredibly interesting. So I'm just going to go right ahead and turn it all over to Teresa to begin with her presentation.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. There. I bet it's shared, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Teresa Macklin, as Aaron said, and I'm going to talk about the way we're handling the culminating experience at Cal State San Marcos. Now, on our program, this is called a, quote, semester in residence, which was, no one anticipated, A, that we would already have a remote program, but that B, COVID would happen. So it's a very strange time to have something called a semester in residence as your culminating experience. Okay, so we're professional science masters. We only started in 2015, and we started as a face-to-face program. And for the first few years, we ran it as a face-to-face program, but there were really a lot of problems with that. One of the largest was the traffic in San Diego County was so bad, people could not get off work and drive to campus and get there in time for class. So they would spend like an hour on the road, and then they'd have to go home afterwards. It was just ridiculous. And a lot of people asked, could we do it remote? So we got approval to offer it remote, and we started that last fall. Last fall was our first completely online cohort. So we shifted to an online format. Now it says 38 units, and as originally developed, it had a lot of hands-on labs. We had a lab where we would teach classes and we would develop content for use in that lab environment on campus. And since it's a cybersecurity, where we could firewall off a little environment where they could do things safely. Okay, so now we don't have that. So it's been a big shift in general. But I'm here to talk about the semester in residence in particular. So it's a 4-unit experience. It's their final semester, so which it happens to be in the spring. So in the fall preceding this, they have a 1-unit writing class where they develop the proposal. So 1 unit, they're developing the proposal, and then in the spring, they're executing that proposal for 4 units. And we've always been very flexible as to the format of that semester in residence. It could be a classic internship. It could be a project. It could be a research thesis paper. It could be any of those things. So we've always been flexible. And what we found after we started the program is that we had a lot of working professionals who were sort of in the cybersecurity field, maybe as a more junior person or even as a senior person, but they didn't really have an educational background to match their position because that didn't exist. Cybersecurity as a education option really didn't exist until very recently. So we had a lot of people who weren't really that interested in stopping their day job to go do a classic internship. That just really wasn't going to work for them. Some it did and some it didn't. So we always did have to be, very flexible with it. And that has really served us well. So now we have remote students. And when you have remote students, a lot of things become difficult if you don't think them through ahead of time. But it did become very difficult to arrange the classic internships. Among these, our internship program really had, there's really a large bureaucracy around internships. Who knew? But they go out and they do a risk analysis, and they have a bunch of paperwork, and there's, insurance and liabilities and all of these things that are very difficult to do remotely. I mean, often, depending on the type of internship, not generally for cybersecurity, they send someone out to look at the facility to ensure it's a good working environment, to find out if there's a history of sexual harassment or risk to students. Okay, we couldn't do that. It's remote. Nobody's going to travel from Southern California to Northern California or what have you in order to do this evaluation. So that became difficult from organizational, I'm going to use the word bureaucracy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but some of the things you have to do became difficult. And it also difficult is we didn't have the contacts. So as the program and the faculty, we no longer had contacts in the region where our student was. So if our student's local, we could, pick up the phone. Remember those? We could pick up the phone and go, hey, I've got this student who's interested in Are you available to participate? But we didn't necessarily know the people up there. And so we did try, contacting people in other educational institutions to see what we could arrange where the student was. But that so far hasn't proved real fruitful. Maybe it will in the future. But we were unaware of opportunities in their community. So it was sort of left to them to go figure out what was available in their community. And that sometimes was difficult. And then also just, on our thesis committee for the semester in residence, it's still called a thesis committee. Generally there's me, program director, at least one other faculty member, tenure track faculty member for the program, and then the external advisor who we didn't know. So now we have an external advisor who we've never met, don't know, and we don't know really their credentials. We don't know, how much they want to or are going to be able to adhere to an academic rigor as far as what the students' work would be. So that also became difficult. And then also, sometimes students need resources that they would normally get at their institution, which wouldn't be available. And this may be anything ranging from lab or technology equipment to, library access or what have you. So those are some of the problems that we saw. But what we did in response was sort of create these models that, we haven't had that many totally remote thesis semester in residences. So I'm just going to describe them real quick. So we have the model of the classic research thesis. So a student proposes something that they can research, and then they go research it, and that's great. That's the classic. That's still valid in our environment. But then also we have students who are developing projects or products. So we've had students, for instance, create an application that you install on your home, something that connects to your home router, and it checks your home traffic for Internet of Things vulnerabilities. So this is a little application. He wrote it, he's protecting that intellectual property. He may develop it and market it, that sort of thing. So he wrote that. So that's a classic development project, and we have had a couple of those. We do also have the classic internship where someone gets placed at a company. We're very fortunate to have a number of technology companies in our area which will still place students. So students who are in our region, and many of our online learners are not very far from us. They're still local. About 50% are still in San Diego County. They might do a classic internship. But we also have a couple of models for remote internships. So this especially became valid once the pandemic hit. So in this particular case, they participate as a member of a team, but remotely. Now, we don't have a ton of experience with this. We just have a very vague model from the last half of last spring semester. But they would work as if they were a normal employee of the company, but working remotely from home. And we don't have any paperwork on that. We don't have any insurance or risk analysis for it, but that may be what we end up doing this spring. We also have probably the more common model in our program is remote work with an external industry specialist. So this would be the case where they're interviewing people or they're working directly with somebody at an organization to develop the project, which often for a cybersecurity program is a cybersecurity program. It's a risk analysis. It's something to do with securing their organization. So I thought, since I am only at 8 minutes, because I'm timing myself, I thought I would mention that from informally, I found that here are the student preferences. This is a small sample, and here's what they like doing to perform a security risk analysis for an organization. It's interesting, they find an organization that needs a security improvement, which is pretty much all of them. So that's a pretty easy thing to find someone to do. And then they go to that company, they do the risk analysis. Maybe they develop a security program, maybe they're trying to conform to a NIST standard or ISO standard, something like that. They propose a framework, they start writing the policies, and they work with somebody to flesh that out. We've had several of these, and that is work that can be done remotely, and it's very helpful to the organization. Sometimes they're using security or tools to improve security posture of an organization. That might be, a product that they get access to, that they can access remotely on a desktop, and then they go ahead and do that development on a remote desktop as if they were part of the organization. So often they have a goal of building their resume. If they're not already employed, they need to get industry contacts, they need to build their resume. So I've hit my 9 minutes, or 10 minutes. I just want to say before I stop here that the key is to be flexible, you can't let it become too rigid, because especially when you're remote, you don't have enough control over the student and the student's environment and what's going to happen in their organization. So we do try to maintain a lot of flexibility for our students with these. And I have some examples if it comes up later. I did put up a couple of examples of some of the projects that we've had and what those look like remote. So if I get time later and anybody wants to see the examples, we'll come back to it. Okay? I shall now stop sharing.
Thank you, Teresa. And now we'll turn it over to Jennie Willis for her to present about the remote components and any things that she shared for her program.
Thank you. So I don't have any slides to share with you guys. I thought I would just kind of tell you the story of what happened to us this spring, but I first wanted to give you some background a little bit on our program. So we started our program in 2012, and we started it with recognition of the need that a lot of our biology and animal science majors were really not qualified to lead organizations that they wanted to go into as far as like management skills. And so what we decided this degree would be benefiting was students that wanted to go manage animal organizations but didn't have that business background. So we started this program with no real contacts other than the area organizations in our area that helped shape our program as far as curriculum needs and all of that. So what we have evolved to in the past 8 years has been experiential components that include 5 hours a week of service to an organization that helps identify a goal for that student and a resume gap that they're trying to fill, along with Capstone project that includes 400 experiential hours in service to an organization, usually in the summer between their first and second year. And that obviously for animal organizations has been largely in person. And we do have students that go from Colorado all over the world in our partner organizations, which we have vetted rather carefully. We learned some lessons as the program started the first year that letting students choose their own projects could lead them into some perhaps less than ideal situations, especially with regards to animal welfare. And so we vet out our partners very carefully. And I've tended and cultivated those relationships with our mentors and the organizations for years now. And I would say that that's a big part of the learning that I had this spring, is that relationship and that cooperation that we've had for years really translated into their commitment on their end, despite what they were going through as an organization, that they wanted to try to commit to helping our students finish their projects and provide opportunities. And so that was a truly wonderful thing that has continued to evolve. And at first, when COVID sort of hit in March, our timeline was that our spring semester was devoted to them writing up their proposals, which then they would carry out in the summer and sometimes continue on into the fall. And then the following spring would be their graduation term. And so we had just finally matched all of our students with their projects for the summer, and they had researched their projects over winter break, and they had all this rich literature review of best practices going into what they were going to be doing, and it was all going to be perfect. And then it wasn't. And so it was an interesting learning going through that with the students and even with myself, because there was definitely a grieving that happened with what was to be and what couldn't be anymore. And sometimes the unknown of whether it could be or not was also challenging just from an emotional bandwidth for the students. And I noticed, and I kind of was observing the students handling it in different ways. And some of them were kind of going through those stages of grief and, oh no, I'm sure I'll be able to travel to Alaska in such a time that I can do this. And I was kind of trying to balance all of the travel guidance from Colorado State with the reasonableness of going to another state, including what their policies were for that organization. And so it all turned out different. So we had 10 students that were heading into their projects, and it all ended up kind of being a little bit different. So I thought I'd just kind of walk you through some of the categories of how we pivoted for those students, since maybe you might see some of your own situations in some of it. I think when things hit in March, I was not realistic enough of the impact it would have on our field. And it's had a different impact on different parts of our field. So our students go into animal sheltering. Sometimes they kind of identify a track that they're trying to build experience so that they'll be ready to be in that type of job when they graduate. And so animal sheltering experienced tremendous kind of benefits of donor gifts and cooperation, increased community cooperation, and they did not, they had increased jobs, lots of kind of boons and benefits for a lot of the animal shelters that now the students, their projects were less affected because of that. For our zoo and aquarium students, we experienced losses of mentors who lost their jobs and left the organization because of the deep cuts, because of the financial situation of closing. We've had now a student lose her project because of the imminent loss of that entire organization. And so it's been pretty sad because these have been my friends, you know, for a long time, and seeing their entire industry, you know, turn upside down is really hard. And so the zoo aquarium students, I'm preparing to help them start to cross-train, if you will, for being prepared to do, you know, great things in other types of organizations, even just temporarily as they graduate next year, because I'm not entirely sure what the job market on the zoo aquarium side is going to look like. It's pretty bleak at this point. So the grieving of that, I'm sure, will be another layer on that for these students. So with regard to how we're doing experiential learning this fall, I've worked with a number of our partners. Usually we do a lot of field trips. They are providing virtual field trips for us where they kind of walk us around and show us different aspects of their organization they want us to see. And that has worked out well in the past when we've done it with our partners in Florida and Alaska and Kenya. And so I expect that will go well. We have identified a lot of online professional development that has become available for the various aspects of our field that kind of has increased in COVID, actually. So there's more sort of training and CEs that they can kind of take and demonstrate that they've learned something from those and be a better professional because they've had those. And then capstone projects, I've been really gratified to know, you know, we're trying to get our group that has been delayed sometimes this year into their projects, but next year it appears, at least right now, our partners all still want to cooperate with us. So that's wonderful. And I thought I'd just give you a quick archetype of what kinds of changes happened. So a few of our capstone projects went ahead as planned. They were considered essential workers by their organizations because they were caring for animals. So that was helpful. They were following all the COVID protocols, but because their organization identified them that way instead of as a student, they were able to stay. And so we had one student who was intending to implement a dog play group plan for that shelter and identify how they could do it and write up a whole sort of plan for how that was going to work. And she's been able to do that. She went to Nebraska. Another student stayed locally here in Fort Collins and worked with our Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And she was going to do a project identifying education opportunities they could use to align with the new standards for K-12 education. And now she's doing that, but she's doing it and learning how to do virtual education as well, because now that organization has pivoted from school programs. Our schools are closed here. They're only virtual at least through October. So they're pivoting to virtual programming. Then we had the category of folks that were going to be able to do their projects, but just not now. And so they had to wait through some of the furloughing of their mentors in some cases, or they had to wait because travel wasn't possible, or they had to wait because things were not safe on the receiving end for them. They were identified as that organization that can't take a student right now, but they are going to go ahead, and sometimes they're going ahead in different ways. So many of our local shelters now, their non-animal care staff are working from home. And so 2 of our students were going to be working with our local shelter, and instead of in person, because they're working on volunteer management in one case and events, which is now all virtual, they're working from home as part of that work at home team. And then the last category of a few students is just that we pivoted entirely from what their project was going to be to a new project. And that project is able to be done whether or not the zoo stays open, because our students were delayed going to Denver Zoo, for example, because they were closed for quite some time. And now they're about to start literally next week. And yet we may not, we may go through another period of closure this fall is what we're anticipating. And so instead of the original project, which was to measure nutritional value in Komodo dragons of their food and kind of learn about that, instead they're pivoting to a national survey of all zoos that keep Komodo dragons about medical records and causes of death, since they tend to die younger in captivity than in the wild. And we've had some other students that have shifted organizations entirely. That Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took a second student who's going to start next week as well to finish a project, since her organization is probably imminently closing, where she was originally going. So I don't know where I am with time, but I'm happy to take any questions on anything else.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you both, Teresa and Jenny. So I guess now we can open it up for questions from the group. If anyone has any questions at all, feel free to chime in, or we can ask some questions.
I got a question.
Sure.
This is Ray. This is Ray. I'm always one to have a question here. So Teresa, I just want to say I was really kind of impressed with the breadth of the different programs, or the way that you manage your programs. And I guess my question was for the student. You said that the students have this choice of, I think I wrote down 4 different mechanisms that they could do a project through. And I was just curious how this is managed through the graduate school. I mean, here at the University of Utah, we kind of have a a single process that's baked into to our official procedures. Was this something you had to go through for each of these to get approved, or is it something that's just there's that much flexibility where you're at? I was just wondering if you could comment.
I don't think that we did have to. Well, this is all run through the graduate studies department, right? So everything's approved through that. At the end, I mean, there's the classic that as a result, they produce a thesis paper. So no matter what their project is, even if their project is entirely about developing a product, they have to produce a paper about that. And that is published in the library. Oftentimes our stuff is embargoed, so you couldn't go look at it because it's embargoed, but they have to produce a paper about it. And then that paper, along with, let's just say it's not a classic thesis paper, along with showing their product, and so that people can evaluate it, is what they turn in to their defense committee, and their defense committee reviews that. Then they also have to produce a presentation about it, which is delivered at a symposium. So no matter what they're doing for their project, they still adhere to that classic, I produce a paper.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, you've still got a student, you still got a faculty committee, you still have a thesis or a project report, a paper that's generated at the end, and there's still a presentation, a public, or maybe not so public presentation for the work.
Yeah.
Okay. Just as within that scope, you got a few other things. Okay, no, that's really interesting. I think that's great that you've had that type of that you've introduced that type of flexibility.
Thank you. And I think I see Tim has his hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jennie a question. So your internships are generally very much hands-on, which has been difficult, if not impossible, to do. So have you seen sort of a trend in the style of internships that your students are able to do now? That's the first part. And the second part is, how do you or the students approach your partners to say, we'd like to do this instead of that?
I think, well, that's a great question. So a lot of ours are really hands-on with animals. And yet what we've tried to pivot around is the interest of that student. So like, for example, the Komodo dragon students were really interested initially in causes of mortality. And then during this period of time, since they had discussed this very experimental study about nutrition, where they would have to be there to take the data, and no other zoo staff member would have time to do that. If that closed and they weren't able to go, then the whole thing would go away. And instead, now they're pivoting to looking at that cause of death or mortality and understanding it better in male and female dragons. That's just talking to people. That's networking all across the country. And we thought that had a lot of benefits, that they could do that, while the essential staff members might still be caring for the animals at the zoo, even if the students weren't allowed to come. So as far as what does that look like? Another student was supposed to go to Kenya and set up camera traps and be looking at wildlife corridors and what was triggering cameras, and were they have these lights that are flashing lights so that the farmers can keep the predators away from their goats. And so they want to see if they're affecting that, and those animals then are using the wildlife corridors to move instead of going through the farm areas. And so she was going to do that, but instead they're setting up the cameras and letting her analyze data remotely. And so there's been some, I would say we open it up as a discussion. So we don't come to it with an ask, we come to it with, what do you need and how can we help? And so they, in this year's worth of relationships, they already knew these students and they had already met them and talked with them, and they kind of knew their interests. And so they tried to pivot around that as much as possible. And some of them, some of the organizations and the mentors, you could tell were just out of bandwidth to consider new stuff. They just were in the fray and they couldn't think very well through that, but they would approach us a month later and say, now we're ready to have that conversation. And so we've had some delay, and we've brainstormed also, what could we do to help the field? And so we have a few backup projects in our mind. you know, a survey across the board for animal shelter workers and compassion fatigue related to COVID, you know, and things like that. So we kind of took it back on ourselves. If we don't have a deliverable piece, you know, that maybe we could do that if then when they became available, they could do the experience there. You know, so we've pulled it apart maybe more this year than ever before. But I would say that's how I've approached them, is like, what can we do? Like, what could you use a student now that sometimes you're at 50% of your original staff? What could you use a student to do and learn, you know, and help you? And then they've come back with some ideas, and then we kind of work it through.
And have you seen delays in graduation yet, or are you still able to get your students to march through in the normal time frame?
Well, the only students that were really affected by this were those that were set to graduate next May. And so I have been doing everything in my power to pivot us to fall, including rearranging some of their coursework so that it could happen in the spring, so that we could maybe get some stuff done in the fall. Everything's on a little bit different time schedule. However, I think now everybody should be able to graduate on time. Because of how the choices that we started to help guide them into making. My student who was going to go to Alaska was probably the most emotional and sad over what she was losing. And so her initial plan was to delay her graduation and go next summer, because you can only do wildlife rehab on baby otters and baby seals one time of the year. And so you can't really do that in the fall or the winter there, and it just doesn't work to transpose it that way. But she was like, no, this is what I want. I've never done, you know, ice seals, and I want to do these particular things. And so she really wanted to have that experience. So we were going to push it to next summer. However, the organization may very well not be there next summer. So it's really very sad. So, and this summer they didn't have any bandwidth to do wildlife rehab. So all those baby otters and baby seals just didn't get rescued. So that was also sad. Been a lot of sadness.
I can throw a question out there for both you, Jennie, and Teresa. For your programs, how much, if any, is there support for like career guidance? Do you, as you're sort of setting up students for their culminating experience / internship, or however it's called, is there also any sort of career guidance or career planning so that the students are set up after graduation or have some sort of path?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll go first because it's a kind of a short answer. So in cybersecurity, there is such incredible demand that it's not difficult for people in cybersecurity field to go get a job because the demand is enormous. There are slight problems sometimes with somebody who hasn't been in a cybersecurity field at all and suddenly wants to make a career change. Like before, I was an accountant, and now I'm going to be cybersecurity. So that has been kind of difficult, and what all that we do is introduce them to people in the industry. So often I'll go, oh, you know, we've got a good student here. Are you interested in, and they'll, you know, pretty much that works pretty much every time. So we're not a good example of that just because cybersecurity is such a hot field in the job market. So now I'll turn it over to Jennie.
That would be awesome if that were true for us. So we do quite a bit with that. I would say we start our very first semester, and the first 5 weeks of the semester with our new students, we're trying to begin with the end in mind, because we are what I kind of tacitly call a choose your own adventure program. Like, you choose a path, and then there's paths within that path that we can set you up like the grand chess game to be in the right position to take that job. But then jumping paths late in our program doesn't set them up for that, sort of like what you were saying. If they change like in their mid-second year and go, no, really, now I want to do zoos, it's going to take more time than our program to build the experience needed for that. So we try really hard to like start and really coach them and tell them more about this field, that all the diversity of jobs that exist, and then they try to find what feels right to them. And we go all the way through trying to outline what their semester experiences should be so that their resume looks right, to helping them write their resume and coaching them on interviewing and working on their letters. That's the fall of their second year. And then we do more with interviewing the spring semester, their final semester, but often many of them have their jobs or have outlined their jobs by middle of the way through that semester in a typical year, air quotes. So this year that didn't happen, although I will say even so, still about 2/3 of my students have gotten positions, and it's the zoo students that are on hold right now, unfortunately. But I would say we do all of that all the way through and try and say, does this make sense as an experience for you? Is this going to fill a gap in your resume that will help? And all of our hiring managers do tell us they want their students to be broad, our students to be broad and to be a manager. They want to have animal care experience plus, some other, business skills to make them marketable.
Thank you.
Teresa, I have a question for you. So you have a wonderful flexible program, and my question would be, how does it work when it comes to international students?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. The only international students that we've had so far have come over here and been local. And so the one that I'm thinking of, he was from Germany, and he got an actual internship with BMW, and he went back to Munich, I think it was, and he did that internship, and we reviewed his paper, but he got somebody there so yeah, no, I just really can't answer it. We do not have enough international students to give you a good read on that. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
I've got a question also for the both of you. So you definitely mentioned needing to be flexible, and perhaps you've come up with other alternatives for the internship experience. So I wonder if this is something that, as a director, that you are the main person kind of overseeing and trying to help come up with these alternatives, or is it something that other faculty members are involved in? And if so, how involved are they in this whole process?
I can take that one first this time. I would say I'm the only person who's doing that because I'm the only person really helping our program. Our faculty still is in the process of really embracing and understanding our sort of more applied science. We're housed in the biology department, which doesn't always do the same kinds of research that we and our students do when we do research. So it is me, and it is the relationships that we've put together over the last 8 years. But I think that has actually made it easier because it's not just sort of a blind entity like we're saying no to CSU, but it's that we want to take this student or we want to help this program, and we feel like a connection to, Jennie and the students, and it's kind of more of a family feel, I think.
So I want to say that for the most part, and to the extent possible, we put the burden on the student. So since cybersecurity is really just such a broad field, and similar to what Jennie was saying, do you want to work in an aquarium or a zoo? Well, there's sort of the aquarium and zoo thing going on in cybersecurity. Do you want to be an auditor? That's very different from, do you want to be a penetration tester or a, red team, blue team, or one of those very technical things. And so it's important for the student to go, for my career, here is what I want on my resume. So then the student proposes this. And sometimes, like I said, it's an internship to which we can give them some contacts, but then it's up to them to get someone to agree to take them. So then let's just say classically, the way this would work is someone would want to work, let's say, in a security operations center. So if they don't know somebody, I might give them a contact I have with a security operations center. And of course, I would give that person a heads up. Then that person works with a student proposes, here's what we've agreed to do. And that happens in the fall. We send that, a faculty member and I agree that, yes, this is worthy, right? It's righteous. This is going to be a good project. It's going to result it's going to be enough work, it's et cetera, complex enough, you know, not something that they can pull down off of Google. So then we contact the external advisor to say, I'd like to verify all this. Are you prepared? We talk to them about, here's what our expectations are for you. Here's what you're going to have to do. And at minimum, because I have learned this the hard way, they may not take vacation in the last week of April when they need to sit on that person's thesis defense committee. So, you know, we give them a calendar. Here's when, here, da, 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 da. And then we do that over email and Zoom. If the, you know, there are times in the bad old days when I would go have lunch with somebody and we would talk it over then, but that doesn't happen now. So this is all, you know, in email, via Zoom. And even if it's via Zoom, I confirm it in email so that there's a record for everybody. So I know I'm not positive I answered your question, but that's sort of the way it's working here.
Okay, yeah, I think so. Something that kind of came up as you're explaining, you know, how there's an outside advisor. How would you say that you're able to keep them engaged in the whole process of that project or experience? That, you know, that the outside, the thing that the student is doing the work for, and those external advisors or people involved in the review.
For me?
Yeah, you or both of you.
Okay, well, I'll start since I forgot to mute my mic. You know, the external advisor is in theory working with that student constantly. So, you know, there was one of those examples I was going to show where we had someone do sort of a classic research thesis paper, but with a twist. They wanted to look at the cyber insurance industry and what, you know, what that effect is on institutions who are organized, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, you know, I happen to have some contacts with a local cyber insurance company, and I set that student up with those people, and he did a lot of interviews with them over Zoom. He took the notes, he did a lot of research. So that one of those people was his external advisor. So she actually met with him. They created a schedule, and this was part of his proposal that she agreed to. She met with him, I think bi-weekly, to review what he was working on and what he was finding and maybe point him in some other direction. So it's sort of up to the student to lay that out, but then we confirm with the external advisor that they've agreed to do this participation. And the level of participation varies widely from project to project.
I would say also that we also have a wide variability of interaction, but we've tried to kind of solicit and maintain relationships for advisors or mentors who are pretty engaged with our students. We have a set of mentor guidelines that we share early on in the process to for a new mentor who is not really exactly sure what they're committing to. We've had a lot of difficulty in our field translating what we're asking for because the zoo aquarium field has had such a rich internship program. We don't ever call it an internship because an internship is a cut and paste, you know, undergraduate experience. And if we start trying to talk like an internship, they're like, oh, well, we can make them an intern. I'm like, nope, that's not what we need. You know, they're a master's student, their capstone master's project is going to be original, and they're trying to do some deliverable for you that's beneficial, that's much bigger than an intern would do. And so that's been a interesting way to talk to people and understand what we're actually talking about. But we've really tried to keep kind of a group of mentors. We now have probably about 30 mentors and only maybe 10 students, 15 students each year that need a placement, but we know what those mentors are really good at, and we know what those mentors want to mentor. So like I have a wonderful mentor in Florida who does reproduction for endangered species, but it's very lab intensive. It's very much more bench work than a lot of our other internships would be, or a lot of other capstone projects would be. And so she wants the right student, and that student has to be good with their skills, and they have to be really smart, and they have to want to be in reproduction. And so if that student exists, then that's the perfect mentor for them. And I shouldn't try and send her anything else. you know, and so like there's some relationship knowledge of what they're good at, what they want to do. And then there's something I call the first pancake syndrome, which is like when we have a new mentor, it goes like making pancakes. The first pancake is always a little bit overdone or underdone. It's not quite perfect, but they sometimes can learn and kind of grow and go, next time I know what I'm doing, next time I'm ready, you know. And so that's kind of how we've grown our partnerships. And I check in with them, you know, 2 or 3 times in the summer. I hear back from those mentors, and the mentors give the final grade for their credit for that summer. And so overall, it tends to be good. We've had a few students who did not live up to their end of the bargain and got rehomed to another project in a later semester, but most of the time, and they learned from that too. Most of the time it goes really well. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you both. And I'm definitely going to steal the pancake syndrome thing. I really like that a lot.
I like that analogy too, yeah. Jennie, if I could follow up on just that last thing you just said, and I'll also throw this to you as well, Teresa. How do you guys handle students who aren't holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to that culminating project? You know, what are your steps that you put in place to try to avoid that? But if it does happen, try to get these students back on track, or yeah, how do you handle those situations?
That's a great question, and it hasn't happened very often, for which I'm very fortunate, because it takes a lot more time to fix it than it does to prevent it, for sure. So I would say it starts with the sort of mentor match part. You know, I kind of talk to them about, you know, we're going to meet all together, me, the mentor, and them, and that, you know, it's as much an interview of that student as it is of that mentor, and that it's got to be a good match. And so if it's not a good match and they say no, usually they won't say no in that meeting, but they'll tell me, and then I have to interpret that to the student. So that becomes a coaching moment of, you know, they don't feel like you're a good fit. Why might they feel that way? You know, and what kinds of things might you have said? What could we do differently? You know, that type of thing. And that's been a good learning opportunity for a couple students. I would say maybe our students might come in, not very many of them, but it exists as a possibility. They come in a little bit judgy about how things ought to be and what things ought to be like in the world. And sometimes that doesn't play well. So we try and soften that out of them before they have their mentor conversations in November and December, but it doesn't always work 100%. Then the other category of students are those that basically didn't do what an employee should do. Show up when you're supposed to, wear the appropriate clothing and shoes that your organization has said to wear. Don't come with cut-off jeans and flip-flops to do animal care, because that isn't going to work well. You know, like basic stuff of professionalism. You know, communicate if you can't come in. Don't repeatedly not show up, like all that stuff. So those couple of students that have done that, were counseled. I would then meet with the mentor. I'm like, can we revive this? Is there anything that this student could do that would make you feel like they could do better? Like at the end, we want a reference. Like at the end, we want that mentor to be their professional development kind of leapfrog into the field. And if that mentor basically says, nope, really, there's nothing good I can say about this student, then I say, okay, I'm going to go back to the student and say, well, here's what you did. Here's where we're at. We have to fix this, and you need a different mentor and you need a different project. And then usually in the past, I've tried to involve them in something that I was doing more directly, like a research project that I had with an organization that I could bring them in on, that then I could have a little bit more oversight and clear expectations. And I would say that a couple of our students rarely, but sometimes struggle with the coursework. Where they just can't participate and be a student. We had a student like that recently who had moved from a small town where she had lived with her parents to go to college and moved here to be, and she was away from her parents and all her support network, and she just couldn't put all the pieces together to be a student. And so she's in the middle of redoing that semester right now, or she will be next week. So we try to coach. We have, like, there's only one student that has left without graduating. So we've worked our way through with all of them. but it certainly does take more work to do it that way. Much easier to just do it right the first time.
Absolutely.
For our program, I give them milestone. I teach that, semester in residence class, and I give them milestones throughout the semester. And I want progress reports, and and I talk to them over and over again about what will happen if you don't perform. You've done all this work, you're going to get to the end and you can't complete. This is not okay. And we've only had 2 instances of people who could not complete their semester in residence project on time. Both of them very early in the program, which was before I set all these milestones. I sort of thought at the time, I don't know what I thought. Well, we're all, adults, we're not. So I have some requirements that they need to turn in, like the first section. They need to talk about their project. They need to meet with us. And so we do that throughout the semester. And I have them turning in drafts of like section 1 of their thesis papers, section 2, et cetera, whatever it is. And so we do that throughout the spring semester. There's, I think, 4 different milestones leading up to a drop dead date for turning in your paper and arranging for your defense.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I do have one more question. I feel as if I've been asking a lot of the questions. How, given where we are and the climate and the state of higher education and this economy and such, do you anticipate any sharp declines in enrollments moving forward, or not just enrollments, but also opportunities with businesses? And if so, what measures are you putting in place now to help pivot?
Who's carrier?
Well, I guess I'll start that one. I did anticipate a fairly sharp decline, which we so far haven't seen, and I anticipated this sharp decline because many times we have employers who are funding or partially funding a student's education, and I'm not sure that those employers A, exist at this point, and B, are prepared to spend that money. So I sort of thought that this fall that I was worried that the program wouldn't go, but it's going, and we're not quite at capacity, but we're approaching it. So I just don't know exactly. I worry that the students won't be able to stay in the program because of employment problems. So I don't know exactly.
I can say I agree with Teresa, because that's where I was at too. I thought we would be seeing, fewer applicants going forward and all of that. We had already made our first round of offers to everybody by the time COVID kind of hit us. So our students had already applied, and we'd already chosen among the students to admit. We have room for 15 students each year, and every year we make offers to 15 students, and 13 or 14 of them say yes on the first round. Then we pull a couple from the wait list, and then by the time we get through all of that, we end up with usually 12 that start our program. So this year I was super smart, I thought, and I was going to over accept. I was going to over accept by the 3 students we're always missing, right? So sounds smart. And yet this year, everybody accepted, everybody stuck with it. So when we admitted 18, guess how many we have starting next week? 18. So exciting. There were still students who were heartbroken to be left off the list. I encouraged them to be applying next year. I've had probably 25 inquiries each week about our program, which I would say is up by about 20. I usually get a handful of inquiries every week, but this has been off the hook. And I think the reason it's off the hook is that graduate school, at least for the zoo aquarium side, is a pretty safe place to be while you don't have a job or a great job outlook. And I do think that the students that are coming in this fall, by the time we get out, like by the time 2022 rolls around, I think we're going to be in a better place. But I'm committed to all these students getting jobs. And so I'm going to be a little bit more, let's cross-train. Let's get some shelter experience while you're here. Because guess what? Shelters still will take you for experience right now, whereas a lot of the zoos will not. They're honoring our commitments as a master's program, but they're not just taking extra, students on. So I'm going to be a little bit more proactive as far as like helping them make sure they're ready for a job, even if it's not the perfect career job they want. It might be in an allied field that will have jobs available.
All right, well, thank you both again. We're here at the end of our time today. It's been great presentations, great conversation with you both, and thanks again for everyone for attending today. This will be recorded and made available for those who aren't able to make it. And again, I hope to see you in our next Ask NPSMA talk.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take care.